guys hear me? All right, great. Sorry, I lost my voice a little bit. Long week of conferences. Happy to be here. So for those of you that don't know, dYdX is the largest decentralized exchange. In this presentation, I'll give a little bit rundown of this current state of affairs of dYdX. I'll do a little bit of a shallow dive into what perpetual smart contracts are, and I'll talk a little bit about dYdX's product-first approach as we launch our L1 on Cosmos, the dYdX chain with our own sovereign validator set, etc. Awesome. So in the status quo, dYdX is the leading decentralized perpetuals exchange. We do about $1 to $2 billion in daily volume. Reached peak in the fall of 2021, where we did about $15 billion on average in daily volume. And we currently have about 20 different assets listed, end goal being a state of the world where it's fully decentralized, all part of the stack, where anyone can permissionlessly list markets. Currently, we have 36 markets, trade perpetual contracts with up to 20x leverage. We have completely self-custody, and we have a mobile app, an API for the high-frequency traders that trade in our exchange, and really fast settlement, and also throughput. We're able to do this today because we are a hybrid DEX, so fully non-custodial. However, currently the order book exists off-chain on a centralized order book that's on AWS in Tokyo. This is really great because it allows for very high throughput, as market makers need order times of about 20 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds, and the custody and consensus is the bottleneck of any blockchain. So 1 second block time just doesn't do it for us. Obviously, that's not an ideal state of the world, as there's a lot of centralized components, and the true mission of DeFi being self-custody, but also decentralizing all parts of the stack. So that means decentralized front end, decentralized and permissionless asset listing, as well as a decentralized architecture, so not on a single server. So the goal is to fully decentralize by this September or mid-October at the latest. The software will be completely open sourced. Anyone will be able to deploy any front end they want, and all parts of the stack will be fully decentralized in this ideal world. Now, what does that mean? So obviously, asset listing processes are fully centralized on dYdX right now. One of our goals right after launch is to create a permissionless way to launch markets where anyone can launch a market in any type of market. So currently, we only serve digital assets, but you could imagine a world where you have perpetual smart contracts on equities, on prediction markets, on pretty much any asset class that exists today, hard assets, real-world assets, etc. And this is the vision of dYdX, to eventually be the largest exchange in the world and try to think 10x bigger. Currently, there's obviously a very slow move to liquidity generally in crypto. But having a architecture where you're able to settle trades almost instantly, but also place an order cancels without consensus is necessary to be able to build a high throughput order book DEX. So September 2023, we're coming up with novel MEV solutions. The goal is to fully decentralize the protocol, have a robust API, and then also have our iOS Android app, and then the GUI also live then. So what does the architecture look like for dYdX v4? Currently, as I mentioned, the order book is currently off-chain on a centralized server. And the main reason why we're building on the Cosmos SDK, and we're most excited for common BFT replication and just generally being able to use the tools of the SDK, is we're able to use the infrastructure to our advantage. So what the architecture looks like at a high level is that every single validator in the network will replicate and have a full version of the order book, meaning that every single order that's placed on the dYdX network will replicate to every single validator in the network, which means that every single validator also has a full state of the order book. Now, how does this work, and how do you come to a consensus of an order book? Well, one at a time, someone will become the proposer of the block, and they'll be able to propose pricing and also matches of those orders. So the reason why this is so important is consensus times, even on like the fastest networks, such as Say claims to have 1 to 2 second consensus times, dYdX will have about 1 to 2 second block times. That's not fast enough for the high-frequency traders to place orders and cancels at the orders of 100 milliseconds. dYdX v4 will allow you to both place orders and cancels off-chain in a manner of about 100 millisecond throughput. But there will also be order types that will exist on-chain, which are called long-term orders. And the differentiation here is really important because no consensus is needed for those short-term orders. The validators themselves in the internal memory will be able to process these short-term orders and the order of magnitude of 100 milliseconds, and also be able to cancel those orders before a consensus ever occurs on-chain. So that's the protocol and application layer. We're also building a proprietary set of nodes called an indexer. The indexer is a full call API suite that has Web 2-like features to allow high-frequency traders and market makers to be able to access both on and off-chain data on the order of hundreds of milliseconds so they could get a full state of the order book. Obviously, full nodes in Cosmos allow you to pull all on-chain data, but due to these off-chain orders, it's impossible to access them at a fast enough level to build algorithms to be able to high-frequency trade with just using on-chain data. Awesome. So I think it would be helpful to go through a little bit of a life cycle of an order. So the life cycle of an order is a user will place a trade from either the API, the GUI, the mobile app, etc. This order will get sent to the closest validator geographically in the set. And then this will be gossiped to every single validator globally in the network. Once everyone has a full state of the order book, then a proposer is then chosen to propose the block, and they'll have a autonomous daemon process that'll determine pricing of all the other nodes, which is a little different from how other exchanges determine pricing, where they use oracles to determine pricing based on the aggregate of centralized exchanges. There will be no centralized party determining pricing on dYdX. Every single validator will determine pricing on their own. So once a block is proposed, the validator will propose matches and then fills, and they'll also propose pricing. Once consensus occurs, that block will be minted on chain. All the validators, 2/3 consensus occurs, and then the next proposer in the set will update. Well, every validator will then update its order book based on the recently proposed block, and the next validator in the set will become the proposer as well. And a little bit about the indexer. So like I mentioned, the indexer is something we're really excited about. It's a little less glamorous than the protocol level, but it's super important. And the goal is to have third parties, and some of the validators on dYdX are already getting grants to be able to build these to build these indexers. They'll probably take a team of about 3 to 5 DevOps engineers to keep up and running, and we're talking to some really great teams to run these indexers. But it's a full call REST API suite, read-only API, so basically just getting order updates about the order book, about account balances, pretty much any on and off-chain data that you need. At a super high frequency level. Like I said, this is really important for the high frequency traders to get updates about the protocol. And there will be 2 different storage and ingestion processes, one on-chain and one off-chain. So stuff like short-term order placement, cancels of those orders, the index updates to the orders before they get settled on-chain, that all happen in an off-chain process, but you'll be able to read it and funnel it in the same way as the on-chain data as well. Before I finish, there's one other thing I wanted to discuss, which is just generally why the perpetuals market is so important. dYdX, we could have focused on spot products, and our roadmap after launch will probably include a few different things, like hopefully eventually launching an options product, a spot market, etc. But we really think that perpetuals is the future of crypto trading in general, and that's for a few reasons. For those of you who don't really have much background in what a perpetual is, you could just think of it as a synthetic way to pretty much trade any underlying asset in a very easy manner. Now, like for example, shorting in a spot market, you borrow the asset, you sell it, and then you return it in a later date. You only have to think about correlations for perpetual markets. So if you want to trade with leverage, it's just like 20x correlation to the underlying. If you want to trade if you want to short an asset, it's just a negative correlation to the underlying. And daily today, perpetual markets do about 4 times the volume as spot markets, and that's mostly because you don't need to lock any assets to be able to add liquidity. It's just however much liquidity market makers potentially want to provide. So the beautiful thing that dYdX wants to do is eventually bring as many retail traders to the exchange as possible through permissionless market listing. So we haven't announced this publicly yet, but the goal is to, about 2 to 3 months after launch, have a process where anyone, anywhere could launch any market, obviously in a self-custody fashion with no KYC needed, meaning that anyone globally could pretty much trade any product as long as there's liquidity in those markets. The biggest issue here is how do you bootstrap liquidity to new markets? And as we've seen with Uniswap and some other AMMs, it's really hard to bootstrap liquidity to markets through retail, just because there's not enough capital being allocated to these markets. So something else that's kind of innovative that we're thinking of is how do we get institutions or large retail pro traders to provide liquidity to new markets. So how you kind of can think about this is similar to an affiliate link, where if someone uses your affiliate link to trade, you get in perpetuity some of the trading fees from that protocol. You could think of it as a bonding period where a market maker or a pro trader can post liquidity to a new permissionless market. It'll exist in isolated collateral, so it won't affect the rest of your collateral on the exchange. And then that market maker or liquidity provider who on onset was part of the success of this market will then be able to earn part of the revenue in perpetuity of this market. And you could imagine if this market eventually does, I don't know, $100 million in daily volume, then this will get upgraded to a cross-margin product, one of the blue chip asset pairs on the exchange, and that market maker or pro trader in perpetuity can then trade that asset. So the world that we imagine is a world where we have a full stack of decentralization. You don't need a gateway to be able to onboard to dYdX or any decentralized product. Obviously, as we saw with Tornado Cash and these other protocols, gateways are very susceptible to censorship. So the goal is to create a censorship-resistant stack where anyone could then host a front end of dYdX. Anyone could access that front end through any search engine. Obviously, we're a long ways away from this. Google search does not allow you to natively browse for ENS addresses, but soon it will come. And then there's completely self-custody. We never take custody of your assets. That full transparency of the balance sheet, as well as a world where anyone can list any market and trade any market at any time. So that's the future vision of dYdX. Thank you.